Over the last few decades, the music industry has endured the loss of some of the most talented and beloved artists of all time. But who are these icons? How did they die? And just where are they buried? Here's the final resting place of these legendary rock stars.
Arguably one of the greatest guitarists ever to walk the earth,
Jimi Hendrix died at just 27 years old on September 18, 1970. Hendrix was found in a room at London's Samarkand Hotel belonging to his on-again, off-again romantic partner, Monica Dannemann. Details of the hours leading up to Hendrix's death are vague, with Dannemann and others having changed their accounts multiple times.
Hendrix apparently took strong sleeping pills combined with red wine,
which caused him to vomit but not wake up, until he ultimately choked to death. The coroner returned an open verdict on his death, however. Hendrix's burial was also a little contentious. In 1970, he was buried in a plot at the Greenwood Memorial Park Cemetery in his hometown of Renton, Washington, marked by a simple gravestone that read, "Forever in our hearts." But in 1999, his family announced plans to build a 27-foot stone memorial in the cemetery, partly funded by fans, complete with granite pillars, a domed roof, and sculptures. Hendrix's friends protested that digging him up was disrespectful, but to no avail. In 2002, the memorial was completed, and Hendrix was moved there to lie alongside his father, stepmother, and grandmother.
Jim Morrison was in rock star retirement when he died in his Parisian home on July 3, 1971.
Like Hendrix, Morrison was just 27 when he died. The official story is that he was found dead in his bathtub from heart failure. But some supposed witnesses have since come forward to say that he may have fatally overdosed on heroin in a nightclub toilet cubicle and was carried back to his apartment by a pair of drug dealers.
Morrison's grave at Paris's Père Lachaise Cemetery is one of the most famous in the world, which is impressive when you consider that he's not the only prestigious name at that cemetery. Père Lachaise is also the eternal home of world-renowned figures including Oscar Wilde,
Marcel Proust, Edith Piaf, and Frédéric Chopin. But the biggest crowds still gather to visit Morrison's impressive shrine, which includes a bronze plaque engraved with his name, dates, and an ancient Greek epitaph chosen by his father that reads, "Kata ton daimana iatou." This is usually roughly translated as "true to his own spirit," but it could also mean "true to his own demons," a potential reference to the troubles that drove Morrison to Paris in the first place. One of the most famous Scousers in history, not to mention an icon of swingin' 60s London, John Lennon left his home country for New York in 1971. Having married the artist Yoko Ono 2 years earlier, Lennon hoped that the bustling, celebrity-filled city would shield him from the constant attention that came with having been a Beatle. Instead, 9 years later, on December 8, 1980, Lennon was shot dead outside his home by Mark Chapman.
When they went inside the gate, and then all of a sudden I heard 5-6 shots, and that was it.
Chapman later said that he'd chosen to kill Lennon because of his fame, believing it would in turn bring him self-glory. On October 9, 1985, Lennon's 45th birthday, an area of Central Park was dedicated to the musician. Lennon had enjoyed many walks in the tranquil space. Renamed Strawberry Fields, in tribute to one of Lennon's favorite Beatles songs, it features a mosaic with the word Imagine at the center, which was presented as a gift by the city of Naples, Italy. Ono herself was involved in the creation of the memorial, and it's believed that she scattered Lennon's ashes in the area. The Beatle George Harrison spent nearly 4 years being treated for cancer before dying at age 58 on November 29, 2001. He had been diagnosed with throat cancer in 1997 and then with lung cancer in 1999. That year, he also survived being stabbed multiple times by a home intruder. In 2001, Harrison had surgery to treat the lung cancer and underwent more radiation to treat a brain tumor, but ultimately died from the disease. Harrison was a follower of the Hare Krishna movement, a branch of Hinduism. In accordance with Hindu beliefs, he was cremated shortly after his death at the Hollywood Forever Memorial Park. A Hare Krishna spokesman told the press that Harrison's wife Olivia and son Donnie would be scattering his ashes in the Ganges. This is a sacred river in Hindu theology, located in Varanasi, India. Crowds of fans and press headed to the city, only for the society to retract its previous comments.
It's believed that Harrison's family did scatter his ashes in the river, but that they waited until they could do it more privately. The most notorious detail about the death of the Mamas and the Papas singer Mama Cass Elliot on July 28, 1974 is absolutely incorrect. Namely, she did not die from choking on a ham sandwich. That was a rumor put out by her manager Alan Carr, who was worried that Elliot had died from a drug overdose and didn't want anyone to know. Unfortunately, the ham sandwich story has since been twisted into a number of cruel jokes about Elliot's weight. In fact, Elliot died from heart failure, potentially brought on by the crash diets she'd long experimented with, mostly because she was so badly mocked for her size. Just 32 years old, Elliot died at a London apartment owned by musician Harry Nilsson, who was out of the country at the time. Her body was flown back to California, where she was buried at Los Angeles' Mount Sinai Memorial Park, marked with a simple plaque. 4 years later, Keith Moon, drummer of The Who, died of a clomethazole overdose at the same apartment. Disturbed by the deaths of his friends, Nilsson sold the apartment to Moon's bandmate, Pete Townsend. Singer, songwriter, and guitarist Roy Orbison was only 52 when he died of a heart attack on December 6, 1988, but he'd lived through multiple tragedies by that point. In 1966, his first wife, Claudette Frady, was killed in a motorcycle crash. 2 years later, 2 of their 3 sons, Roy Jr. and Anthony, died in a fire at their house near Nashville while Orbison was on tour. Then, having made the top 10 9 times between 1960 and 1965, Orbison's career steeply declined. However, in between these 3 great losses, Orbison met the woman who became his second wife, teenage pre-med student Barbara Jacobs. The two married in 1969 and went on to have 2 sons together, while also raising Orbison's surviving son, Wesley, from his first marriage. In the 1980s, Jacobs became Orbison's manager, and he experienced something of a comeback. In 1987, he was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and by then, he'd also formed a supergroup, the Traveling Wilburys, which also included Tom Petty and Bob Dylan. The very next year, however, he died suddenly. Orbison is buried in Westwood Memorial Park in Los Angeles, but his grave is currently unmarked. However, you can find its location based on the grave of Barbara, who was buried beside him when she died in 2011. After living about as full-on a life as it's possible to live, Frank Zappa died of prostate cancer on December 4, 1993, aged 52. His family announced his death with a statement, reading, "Composer Frank Zappa left for his final tour just before 6 p.m. Saturday." Zappa was buried in Westwood Memorial Park in Los Angeles, a surprisingly conventional choice for someone who determinedly bucked convention at every opportunity. The cemetery is the final home of many superstars from movies, music, and the arts. In 2020, a single burial plot there cost a staggering $745,000. There is one thing that's unusual about Zappa's resting place, however. He's buried in an unmarked grave, supposedly near Roy Orbison's similarly low-key resting place. His family has never given an exact reason for this, but it certainly fits with the character of a man who always preferred to take the path less traveled. The Beach Boys lost more than a bandmate when 39-year-old Dennis Wilson, the band's drummer, drowned on December 28, 1983. In addition to being the middle brother of Brian and Carl, he was Mike Love's cousin, too. Dennis was swimming with 3 other people off the Marina del Rey harbor when he dived underwater and never resurfaced. The week after his death, President Ronald Reagan intervened so that Dennis's body could be buried at sea, per his wishes, an honor usually reserved for veterans of the Navy or Coast Guard. In 1997, Dennis's younger brother Carl was diagnosed with cancer, although he continued to play with the band while receiving treatment. In December that year, the Wilson brothers' mother, Audrey, died, aged 80, and was buried in Los Angeles' Westwood Memorial Park. Her grave marker identifies her as the original surfer girl. 2 months later, on February 6, 1998, Carl died too and was buried in the same cemetery. Elvis Presley struggled to find privacy when he was alive, and even after his death, people couldn't keep their hands off him. When Presley died of a heart attack on August 16, 1977, aged 42, the nation went into mourning, and in some cases, denial. The day after Elvis's death, His father, Vernon Presley, allowed around 30,000 fans to view his son lying in state in Graceland. At the funeral procession the following day, Elvis was taken to Forest Hill Cemetery in a white hearse, followed by 17 white limousines for a private ceremony. Vernon had wanted his son buried at Graceland, but it wasn't zoned for burials. So instead, Elvis was interred inside a steel-lined coffin weighing nearly 1,000 pounds and placed in a large mausoleum next to his mother, Gladys. The tomb was then sealed with a double layer of concrete and covered with a marble slab. That wasn't the end of it, though. On August 29th, 3 men were caught trying to steal Presley's body with the intention of ransoming it. After that, the burial rules were waived and Elvis and Gladys were returned to Graceland. When Vernon died in 1979, he was buried next to them. One of music's greatest love stories started in the Grand Ole Opry and ended less than 20 miles away in Hendersonville Memory Gardens. In 1956, upcoming country star Johnny Cash met the already famous June Carter backstage at the famous Nashville venue. It wasn't supposed to be love at first sight, however, as both were married to different people. Nonetheless, that night, Cash reportedly told Carter he was going to marry her. Their professional and personal relationship deepened in the 60s, when the pair started touring together. Carter was inspired to write Ring of Fire about her illicit feelings for Cash. In 1966, Cash's first wife, Vivian Liberto, finally sued him for divorce on grounds of infidelity and his addictions to various drugs and alcohol. Carter and Cash officially became a couple, but it was only when he proposed to her live on stage in front of 7,000 people on February 22, 1968, that she agreed to marry him. And she did, just over a week later. The couple was married for 35 years until Carter's death, aged 73, on May 15, 2003. Cash died a few months later, on September 12th. They are buried next to each other in a joint plot in Hendersonville Memory Gardens, Tennessee.
We share the backstage, on stage, we share the music, the feeling and the emotion and the joy of it, and the pain and the sadness of it.
If anything is certain in the world of rock and roll, it's that life can end suddenly. But David Bowie wasn't worried about that. As his keyboardist Mike Garson once explained to Billboard, Bowie had decades of advance warning, because in the 1970s, a psychic told him he would die at 69 or 70. Garson added, Bowie didn't doubt it for a second. He accepted it and planned his future out based on that. And sure enough, Bowie died on January 10, 2016, after what was described in an official statement as an 18-month battle with cancer. He'd turned 69 2 days earlier. Bowie's early warning, as well as his cancer diagnosis, ensured that the singer could make his final wishes clear. He asked that his ashes be cremated and scattered in Bali, following Buddhist rituals practiced on the island. Despite these very clear instructions, and no evidence that his family had any intention of ignoring them, there were still rumors that Bowie's widow Iman had given permission for some of his ashes to be scattered at 2016's Burning Man festival. Bowie's son, Duncan Jones, immediately took to Twitter to shut down the claim, writing, "What people will do and say for attention never ceases to amaze me. Not true." Kind of a gross claim as well. Losing Eddie Van Halen in 2020 was a painful twist in a year that had already claimed so many lives. The guitarist rose to fame with his eponymous band, co-founded with his brother Alex, and revolutionized the sound that could be made with an electric guitar. He inspired real and fictional guitarists alike, even providing the music for Marty's Alien tape in Back to the Future, although he politely declined a part in the Bill and Ted movies.
Bogus!
Van Halen was 65 when he died of a stroke on October 6, 2020, after battling cancer. He had been diagnosed with throat cancer in 2000, but in 2004 said that the cancer was gone. A few weeks after his death, his son Wolfgang revealed that his father had been diagnosed with advanced lung cancer in 2017 and given only 6 weeks to live. Van Halen received treatment in Germany, which Wolfgang credits with the 3 years he survived after the diagnosis. But in 2019, following a motorcycle accident, Eddie was found to have a brain tumor. It's believed that Wolfgang granted his father's final wishes and scattered his ashes off the coast of his hometown of Malibu, California. 1/3 of the most famous girl group to emerge from Motown, Supreme Mary Wilson, died suddenly on February 8, 2021. aged 76. The cause was later reported as hypertensive atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, a buildup in the arteries caused by high blood pressure that eventually leads to heart failure. In keeping with restrictions on funeral sizes imposed by the COVID-19 pandemic, Wilson's family held a small private ceremony for her on March 16th, with the intention of holding a larger gathering when it was safe. Wilson was buried in Holy Cross Cemetery in Culver City, California, which is also the final home of a number of other legendary artists, actors, and musicians. Most importantly to Wilson, she was buried next to her son, Rafael Ferrer, who had died in a car crash in 1994, aged just 14. She left behind 3 other children, including a cousin whom she'd adopted, 10 grandchildren, and 1 great-granddaughter. Queen singer and songwriter Freddie Mercury was never afraid to bask in the adoration of enormous crowds, but he didn't want that kind of attention after his death. Diagnosed with acquired immunodeficiency syndrome in 1987, Mercury knew that he would likely die within a matter of years. He decided that he wanted to be cremated and knew just where he wanted his ashes scattered, but only told his close friend and ex-fiancée, Mary Austin. Not even his parents knew. Mercury told Austin that the reason for the secretiveness was because, in his words, "I don't want anyone to dig me up. I just want to rest in peace." After Mercury died at age 45 on November 24, 1991, he was cremated at Kensal Green Cemetery in northwest London. Austin delayed scattering the ashes for 2 years, however, worried that someone would see her and reveal Mercury's resting place to the world. In 2013, a plaque honoring Farrukh Bulsara, Mercury's birth name, was found on a tree in the cemetery in which Mercury had been cremated. It was inscribed with the phrase, "Pour toujours de toi avec tout mon amour, M." In English, this means always to be close to you with all my love. Although many assumed the M stands for Mary, Austin has since denied that she scattered Mercury's ashes there. According to his New York Times obituary, Ray Charles once told an interviewer, "It's not a question of how long I live, but it's a question of how well I live." Although there was never going to be a good time to say goodbye to the multi-talented, genre-defying genius of soul, Charles did live to 73, which is impressive by rock star standards, especially given that he overcame an addiction to heroin, and he continued to record music and play live into his last year. Charles died from complications of liver disease on June 10, 2004. He was buried in Inglewood Park Cemetery in Los Angeles, home to a number of other industry icons, from Ella Fitzgerald to Etta James to Sugar Ray Robinson. Charles' memorial service at LA's First African Methodist Episcopal Church was also a star-studded affair. Unsurprising, given Charles' legendary status. Stevie Wonder, Willie Nelson, and B.B. King all performed, and the 1,500 attendees included Reverend Jesse Jackson and Quincy Jones. Jones told the New York Times that he'd give anything to get Charles back, but also admitted, "I know that heaven has become a much better place with him in it."
I knew there was a man that had a voice that touched my heart.
The family, friends, and fans of Irish band The Cranberries were shocked and dismayed when frontwoman Dolores O'Riordan died on January 15, 2018, aged just 46. O'Riordan was found dead in the bathtub of her room in London's Hilton on Park Lane, where she'd been staying during recording sessions. She had called her mother at around 3 a.m. and was found around 6 hours later. An inquest found a high level of alcohol in her blood, concluding that her death was a tragic accident. O'Riordan's body was returned to her native Ireland. Before her funeral, she lay in repose in an open coffin in St. Joseph's Church in the city of Limerick, where thousands lined up to pay their respects. The funeral took place on January 23rd at the local church in her hometown of Ballybricken, County Limerick, where she used to sing in the choir. That day, radio stations across the country played the Cranberries' hit "When You're Gone" in her honor. After the private service, O'Riordan was buried next to her father, Terence, in Carley Cemetery, a couple of miles away. Chuck Berry is so integral to rock music that in 1986, he became one of the first inductees into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Many consider his 1955 track Maybelline the seed that grew into the genre of rock and roll. Berry started singing in his church choir aged 6 and picked up the guitar as a teenager, performing in a number of small-time talent shows. He was in his 30s when he wrote many of his most popular songs and released 8 top 40 hits between 1955 and 1960. As he grew older, Barry continued to play. In 2014, at 88 years old, he was still playing a monthly gig at local St. Louis restaurant and bar Blueberry Hill. On his 90th birthday, he announced the release of what would be his last album, Chuck, which he dedicated to his wife of 68 years, Themetta. Before it was released, however, Barry died of natural causes on March 18, 2017. He was buried in Bellerive Heritage Gardens in his native St. Louis, Missouri. You can probably guess where Prince chose as his eternal resting place, but it still comes with a uniquely Prince twist. The iconic singer's sudden death at age 57 on April 21, 2016, rocked the whole world. It was especially shocking, and no less sad, to learn that he had died from an accidental fentanyl overdose. The star had consistently presented himself as anti-drugs and alcohol, even banning alcohol and cigarettes from his famous Minnesota estate, Paisley Park. Prince was cremated 2 days after his death in a private service, as fans laid tributes outside Paisley Park. At the time, his publicist said that the location of his remains would be private. But that October, it was announced that Paisley Park would reopen as a museum, and Prince himself is now the main attraction. As of 2021, Prince's ashes are contained in an urn designed in collaboration with his sister Tyka Nelson and nephew President Nelson that sits in the foyer of Paisley Park. The urn is a miniature version of his house, complete with a purple piano, working lights, and his gem-studded logo.
If you apologize, and I'll drop the whole thing.
Yeah, I know. I'll do it, but you say it first.
Well, we'll both say it at the count of 4.
No, we did that already, and
so we'll do it again.
Johnny and Joey Ramone famously hated each other, so it's probably a good thing that they're buried on opposite sides of the country. The pair never really got on, but their animosity boiled over when Joey's girlfriend, Linda Danielle, cheated on him with Johnny. The couple later married. When Joey was dying of lymphoma, Johnny refused to visit him. The only former bandmate who did was Tommy Ramone. Joey died on April 15, 2001, and was buried in Hillside Cemetery in Lyndhurst, New Jersey. Johnny did not attend the funeral. The following year, on June 5th, Dee Dee Ramone died of a heroin overdose, aged 50, shortly after the band had been inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. He was buried in LA's Hollywood Forever Cemetery. Johnny followed him there 2 years later, when he died of prostate cancer, aged 55, on September 15, 2004. Johnny was cremated, and Linda kept his ashes, but he also had a 4-foot statue of himself placed in the cemetery. Joey isn't totally alone on the East Coast, though. Tommy Ramone died on July 11, 2014, of cancer of the bile duct, and was buried in New Montefiore Cemetery, New York. Janis Joplin died of an accidental heroin overdose on October 4, 1970, 3 weeks after the death of Jimi Hendrix and 9 months before that of Jim Morrison. 2 days later, Joplin was cremated at Los Angeles' Westwood Village Mortuary, with just 10 people in attendance. Her ashes were scattered in the Pacific Ocean, off the coast of Marin County, north of San Francisco, as Joplin had requested. You can't visit the exact spot where Joplin was laid to rest, but it's actually possible to visit the room where she died at the Landmark Hotel, which is now the Highland Gardens Hotel, on Franklin and North Sycamore Avenues in Hollywood. If you're feeling morbid, you can even sleep there. Today, Room 105 is home to a plaque commemorating Joplin, while the closet is filled with fans' scribbled tributes to the legendary singer.
The lead singer of the enormously popular rock band Nirvana is dead. Apparently, he was a suicide at the age of 27.
The story of Nirvana frontman and grunge icon Kurt Cobain's death is well known. Cobain took his own life on April 5, 1994, at his home in Seattle, Washington. His body was found 3 days later. After Cobain's death, his widow Courtney Love had his body cremated. The couple had been intermittent Buddhists, and so Love wanted to give Cobain's remains the appropriate spiritual treatment. She divided the ashes, scattering some into the Wishkah River near Cobain's childhood home and keeping some herself, reportedly in a bear-shaped handbag alongside her wedding dress. She took these ashes to a Buddhist monastery in Ithaca, New York, and left some with the monks for consecration. The monks mixed the ashes with clay and turned them into satsas. a kind of cone-shaped sculpture around 3 inches tall and painted gold, which is intended to be kept in a small shrine. Love took the remaining ashes back home. She kept them in her closet until 2008, when she reported that they had been stolen, apparently by someone she knew.